Nice. Thank you very much. So Dave, thank you very much for coming to visit us here at our store. It's a pleasure and an honor for us.
That's a beautiful store.
Thank you very much. We just heard a bit of what these beasts and these little beasts can sound.
Yes.
They sound amazing, I have to say. The first thing I would like to ask you is what is the first thing you look at when approaching building a new amp?
Well, it generally comes from something that someone asked me to do, or an idea that they have, and then I start thinking about it in my head and what I want to do or what I want to accomplish with that amp, and then I just start putting it together.
So the inspiration comes from outside, from somebody, and you just try to make that happen.
I mean, pretty much now in my career, some of the sounds have been really established, like the BE channel and HB channels. They've been really established. So now it's, sometimes people ask for variations on it, or more vintage sounding, or that's why we make so many different amplifiers.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Is there any difference between the requests that a pro guy makes you or someone, a home recording artist?
Generally, the pro guy can tell me better what he wants than the average person. So he's able to articulate that better, and it's easier for me.
Yeah, the experience counts there.
Yes.
No, like they already have played a lot and they know exactly what kind of sound they want. And the vintage thing, it's something like never ending, I guess. No, like they won't always go back in that kind of sound they are used to hearing in the old records, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it never. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like it's always here. Like there's some kind of appealing to that sometimes it's difficult, because this is another question I would like to ask you. The technology behind an amp is, at least compared to other devices, is relatively simple, no? I would say. Do you think there's still room for innovation and attract people beyond the vintage sound, or trying to go back, something that is appealing right now more times?
Innovation.
Yeah.
If anything, I think we go further backwards.
I think so.
My experience is that people don't want to hear something new. They just don't. They always gravitate towards the classic great sounds of the guitar players they admire, and it's hard at this point. There's been so much done. It's hard for innovation also, you know. And sometimes it just won't work because they still want to hear the sounds, you know.
Indeed. Yeah, actually, how do you achieve a vintage sound? Because I think it's not only about replicating a sound, no? You also have to add something, no? Or it's just a question of replicating a sound?
No. You replicate a sound, but you also generally, like, all my amps give them more features than that original sound maybe had. So in one setting on the amplifier, you can get your favorite guitar player's sound, but there's a lot more sounds you can get out of it. So that's how it started. I mean, maybe my favorite amp was a old vintage Marshall Plexi amplifier from 1968, but it's one sound, one setting, that's it.
Yeah.
And so now, how do you get that at a quiet volume? How do you give it more gain? But retain the feel of it?
Yeah, totally, absolutely. What have changed after so many years building amps in your approach? Or you have always have a very methodical way, or?
The approach, you get better over the years. You learn more, you constantly learn more, or learn different ways of doing it. So that's changed. You get better at what you do. But it's still really all about the sound in your head.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you make.
Yeah. And also, talking about innovation, we talk a bit about innovation. What do you think about the amp simulators or all that digital world? Do you feel it as a threat or to the amps?
Well, surely it's a threat to some extent, but it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel like a tube amp. It doesn't react like the tube amp.
Yeah, that's something that many players says, no? The feeling.
Doesn't have the feel to it. So yeah, and also I kind of look at it as sort of like piracy. You know, you work for many years, and then someone will buy a Kemper or something, model your amplifier, and then use it.
Yeah, it's tricky at least, you know.
Or some people buy it and return it after they do that.
Yeah, because there are so many things that are copyrighted.
Yes,
Why this?
But you can't.
Actually, well, the wall around this issue is not very, extended, and they haven't talked about that. But yeah, in a way, there's a lot of people who think like you. Because actually, you have spent a lot researching for a new amp, many years, and then someone takes a photo of it.
Yep.
And that's it. Although with these kind of things, there's always people who says, I just make it for the final customer. The final customer makes a photo of his own equipment.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to trust that in a way.
Maybe, yeah.
Well, that about amps is one thing. I would also like to talk about your guitars.
Oh, yes.
That you are doing with Grover Jackson.
Many.
We have a wall. Here.
Pick your favorite.
I couldn't. We have had a huge response about it. Every people that comes to our store are always interested in one of these. They want to try one of those. What can you tell about this new endeavor you took a couple of years ago?
I just decided one day that I'd love to do guitars, as I've been involved in the guitar industry since I was a kid, since 18 years old, and worked continually all my life around high-end instruments, vintage instruments, high-end retail. I've been involved in all of it. So I knew what I wanted in the guitars. I knew what I wanted them to be, and I wanted them to have a vintage aesthetic and kind of feel, so it's broken in, but like modern playability. So that's what we did, and we did it with Grover Jackson. Who better to do it with?
Yes,
a legend in himself. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So maybe this is a dumb question, or maybe it's the $1 million question. But what makes a good guitar? Because we have so many options out there. What makes these stand out from the competition? What do you say is something that you're gonna achieve with the other one?
Feel. It doesn't feel like a brand new guitar. It feels like an old guitar. If you want that feel, you're gonna get that. Even guitars that we make that are not aged, because we make non-aged guitars also, they still have a broken in feel to them. Also, we use something called zero shift neck pins in our guitars, which are two metal dowels that go into the neck from the body. So it prevents the neck from shifting. But what it also does is creates a better connection between the body and the neck. Mm-hmm. There's more mass, and there's more surface area that they connect. So it creates a better sustain and a more alive guitar.
Well, I haven't had the time to try all of them, but
that would be a lot of time.
Yeah, but a couple of them, and I have to say the sound is amazing. Not only the playability, of course, that's very important.
We also made our own pickups.
Yeah. That's why, because there's another response. It's not the typical one you receive from guitars with the same shape, maybe. Mm-hmm. And other thing that I like is the many options you have, because I think anyone can find the right guitar for them.
Yes.
With this, because for
we
example,
make all styles of guitars, from more vintage S style guitars to vintage T style guitars to really vintage T style guitars to more modern instruments.
Exactly, I think that's something that is good for the audience and the public, to have many options, because sometimes with more known guitars, you have these options only.
Yeah.
You are stick with this sound. But this way you can, for sure, find your own. No?
Yeah, and many different playing styles and many different. It's really designed for everyone. Just all the different players.
I think so, and they look beautiful.
Yeah.
That's also sometimes they say very beautiful guitar. That's also appealing, because I think, from my point of view, its sound, playability, and sometimes also to have a good-looking guitar also makes it more appealing to play, you know?
Yeah.
And it's certainly beautiful. So, well, this is your first time in Barcelona, I heard, no? Have you had the time to go around and see it? You like it?
Good so far, yeah.
So we just hope that you enjoy this city, and thanks again. Thanks for coming. Okay?
No problem.
It's a pleasure for us. Thank you very much, Dave.
All right, nice to meet you.
Well, that's all. Not to make it too long. I think it was
Great.
nice. Unless you have something else you like to say
No,
about
that's good. No, that's
it's okay
perfect.
for
Yeah.
you? Just in case you want to highlight anything else.
Every time we do all this at different places, it's always a different feel or a different. What's going to happen is different. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So,
Yeah.
¿Alguien quiere hacer algún tipo de preguntas? ¿Alguna cosa que gustaría saber sobre los amplificadores, las guitarras, alguna cosita?
Las pastillas de las pickups. Todas son las mismas, las humbuckers.
Are all the humbuckers that you build the same, or
No.
they have differences?
¿Qué marcas son?
There's a.
Son tu propia, they are your own brand, no? You make your
Yes,
own.
we make
pickups.
our own. Yes, correct.
So what about the sound?
So we have a humbucker called a classic humbucker, which is about 7.9K. We have a classic plus humbucker, which is about 8.3K around. So it's just a little hotter. Then we have the neck version of the classic humbucker, just one neck version, which is about 7.5. Don't quote me on this exactly. We also make our P90 style pickups, which are vintage style P90, not hum canceling, just a cool thing. We also, in humbuckers, we make a hotter humbucker called a Triple D, which is about a 16K humbucker, which is what was in Sammy's guitar, who played. And we make single coils also, Alnico 3 single coils, which sound great. Vintage, very vintage, form var wire, Alnico 3, and Alnico 5 magnets on all the humbuckers.
Okay.
About
Mucha información técnica que te diré después. There's a lot of technical information I will explain to him later,
yes,
okay? Because I just forgot to ask you about the collaboration with Grover Jackson. How did it come up? How?
Well, Grover was always a shop that worked and made some other parts for other manufacturers also. And he came up to us and was looking. We had started the guitar making with another luthier, but he could not possibly keep up with our demand. So he came up and said, "Hey, I could do this for you." So then started the collaboration.
Nice.
And then we made pickups together, and we really took it further than we had before.
Good. I think your brand is one of those that we like to have here in our store, because you put quality over quantity. And I think that's very important. Sometimes when you grow up too quick or too fast, you start to make things like more industrial in some way, and you forget the handcraft. Is that your approach as well with guitar?
Yeah, I mean the guitars, yes. I'm very particular about how they feel and how. It's not just Grover making the guitars. What the difference is what I want to see in the guitar and how he just makes my vision.
So this comes from you.
Yes. The guitars come from
on the
me.
contrary, always,
Just like the amps, yes.
Yes. So nice. So he just put your vision, something material like that.
Yes.
So.
Because there's a lot of details that I look at, just how the edges of the neck feel and how the back of the neck feels and the shape, and it's a lot of little tiny details, how the pickups sound.
So playability plays a big role for you, no?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Well, I mean, for most of guitarists, because sometimes we forget that the better we play, the better it sounds, no?
Right.
So because, I mean, a lot of, 70% of the sound comes from these 5 here, no?
That's true, very true, yeah.
Okay. ¿Alguna otra pregunta por aquí o todo?
Cuando hizo la guitarra pensaba en fabricar una línea de guitarra o tipos de guitarra pensando en sus sonidos de sus amplis, o pensaba una línea de guitarra independientemente del sonido de sus amplis, de su amplificador.
Does your vision or your approach to building guitars has something to do with what you do with your amps, or is something completely different?
So, the guitar approach is
I mean, if
I mean,
you
do I
have
have
used
the same approach with my amps?
I mean, if it's completely different from a technical point of view in how you do it, he asks, no, like if you translate somehow your knowledge building this to the guitars, or has nothing to do, and it's a completely new approach.
I don't think it has something to. I don't think they're related necessarily. It's just my experience in the business that brings all those.
And listening to the musicians,
knowing about all these old guitars and vintage guitars, and knowing about newer high-end guitars, and I just learned a lot over the years in the business.
No particularmente tenga que ver esto con lo otro, básicamente lo que he aprendido eso después de muchos años, ¿no? En la industria, escuchar a otros músicos lo que quieren, y lo que he aprendido básicamente de la industria, lo que se demanda y lo que la gente necesita para la línea de guitarras.
¿Empezó a hacer amplis directamente o empezó a reparar o empezó en una tienda reparando amplis y luego fue como una especie de evolución hacia
How did you start with this business? I mean, did you start repairing amps? Did you start building from scratch, or how did you start?
It's a long story.
Es una historia larga.
I started working for a studio instrument rental company in 1988 in Los Angeles called Andy Brower Studio Rentals that did cartage for studio guitar players. Famous ones like Steve Lukather and Michael Landau and all sorts of people. And then I started building rigs for people after a little while there. And that just snowballed in my career. Then I got involved with Bruce Egnater in the early 90s, who really taught me a bunch about amplifiers. And we were partners on the early Egnater amps, the very early ones in the early 90s. And just kept working, kept doing rigs for people, and then started building my own amplifier. So.
Nice. Among them, people like Eddie Van Halen, Steve Stevens, Joe Bonamassa, Regis Ambora, Dave Grohl. I mean, how does it feel?
That's it. I've worked for almost all the guitar heroes I had growing up.
That's like a dream came true, ¿no?
Yeah.
Nice.
That's good.
¿Entendiste más o menos, no? Porque creo que sí. Perfecto. ¿Alguna otra pregunta por aquí que...? ¿Sí? So Dave, thank you very much again.
Excellent.
It's a pleasure.
Pleasure.